The Zora Neale Hurston Trust presents the It's All About Zora series. We'll be discussing all things Zora with artists, academics, and fans of Zora Neale Hurston on the It's All About Zora series. Plus, we will uncover her influences on our guests' lives and work. So let's get the conversation started. Hi, Marvin. Thank you so much for joining me today on It's All About Zora.
Thank you so much for having me. It's exciting. It's been a long time coming, but we finally made it.
Yes, we have finally made it. So you are in charge of Zora's legacy. You are a leader of Zora's legacy in a very special place in America because it is the place that Zora last lived and that she's buried, Fort Pierce, Florida. Before we get into that, I have to ask, how did it start? How did you find Zora? How did she find you?
Well, I would have to say, I don't know if I'm leading anything. I think Zora is still leading me, but it's been absolutely amazing. So, I'm originally from New York, but I graduated from the University at Albany, upstate New York, and wanted to get out of that cold and moved down to Florida. I think it was the second school where I taught in West Palm Beach required that we teach There I Was Watching God. And I had never read it before. This is me graduating with a bachelor's in English, a master's in reading, had never heard of Zora Neale Hurston. So you can imagine how upset I was about that. But then I left that school and moved up to Fort Pierce to take a job at the college. Again, only knew about Their Eyes Watching God, knew none of her background, knew nothing about where she lived, where she was. So it was a surprise to me one afternoon when I was talking with a colleague who is a Zora scholar, and they were like, "Don't you know Zora like died right here in Fort Pierce?" And I was floored, like literally. So I went out at the end of the day with my flip video, those old flip videos, and I went to all of the Zora sites. So I'm like walking through, it was like a Alice Walker moment. I'm at the grave site trying to find her, and I just could not believe it. I cried. I called my wife and literally cried. I was like, "Babe, can you believe that Zora Neale Hurston is right here in Fort Pierce?" And it's like it was a whirlwind from that point on. I worked with that scholar at the college, gave me all of his work and background on Zora, and I applied for a teaching fellowship at the State College and received it. And it's just been amazing since then. They gave me a small little piece of money to do this work on Zora, and it took me to all of the places where Zora has lived. It just happened really organically. God led me to Fort Pierce, and then I found Zora.
I like to imagine that Zora and God have chit chats, daily chit chats on a cloud in
Regularly.
the sky, and they're like drinking coffee or something because I can attest to that. It's very serendipitous and unconventional. When you happen to find Zora, she happens to find you, and you're like, aha.
Meant to be.
Yes, meant to be. So, how long has it been since you landed in Fort Pierce that you've been doing this work?
So I moved to Florida in 2003, and then I moved to Fort St. Lucie, that area, in 2006. But I found out about Zora in 2010, and I received that fellowship in 2012 and have been doing this work since then.
It's like up here are the golden bricks, right? To build this road to what you're supposed to do for Zora. Our viewers may not know about Fort Pierce. And so I do want to break that down a little bit. You touched on it. That is where Zora was laid to rest. And Alice Walker, we always owe her a huge debt because she has a very important role in preserving and really revitalizing the legacy of Zora Neale Hurston. So would you like to tell our viewers about that?
The famous Alice Walker comes to Fort Pierce in the 70s doing her research, comes and finds her grave site, and then puts a marker on there that's still there today. So it's a wonderful place to go to if you haven't gone. And is really like a living memorial, right? People bring stuff, all kinds of crazy things there and kind of amazing things there to pay homage to her. But yeah, Zora finds herself in Fort Pierce in 1957 by the request of C.E. Bolin, who owned the paper in Fort Pierce, the Chronicle, the black newspaper. And she comes there to write for him. And there's all sorts of stories behind that, not getting paid potentially, and all this other uh, interesting stuff that happens with that newspaper. But she does some odd jobs too, and works at the high school, and then falls on some health issues, and winds up in this segregated nursing home, and that's where she dies in 1960, and then is laid to rest right there in Fort Pierce. So a lot of people get us mixed up with Eatonville because that's where she grew up, even though she wasn't born there. And a lot of people think that she's buried in Eatonville, but she's not. She's buried in Fort Pierce.
Every time I visit Florida, I take that 2 hour drive to Fort Pierce to be one of those people that put something crazy on Zora's grave. And I think about it, you said a memorial, I think about it as an altar, especially with
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
initiation into voodoo. And it was,
Yes.
if I can tell you a story and tell our viewers a story, which I'm kind of envious, and it made me think, I think Zora wants my child. She's taking care of me so she can have my child because I visit Florida 3 to 5 times a year for Zora. And I always take her stuff, but no matter what I take, it's not there the next time I go back. Well, my son, in January of this year, he picked out two silver birds to put on Zora's grave. And according
Wow.
to my contacts in Fort Pierce, those two little silver birds are still there.
Oh, wow.
I think she wants my
Wow.
baby.
She wants it all.
So something interesting that happens every time I visit the gravesite is it's always about the thunderstorm in true Florida fashion. And they're gonna pass quick, right? But I can see in the clouds the storm is coming, but it always holds off until I have my visit with Zora. But there's something else that happens too. The roosters are always out there making all the noise. And I am a northern girl. So going
I'm into like, well, northern person.
But when I'm leaving, I usually have to stop for the roosters crossing the road.
Wow, you're really having a spiritual experience on this. But no, I can see that every time we go. I normally go with either students or we're doing tours or but it's always something unique. If it's not like something that someone is leaving there that is very interesting and is a great place for discussion, there's someone who we meet there. The most interesting people visit. The last time I did a tour there, we met a mother, an elderly mother, and her two daughters. They were white from like the Midwest somewhere, and it was the mother's request that before she be placed in assisted living or nursing home or whatever, that she go visit Zora's grave. And it's just amazing how many people across. You don't have to be black, you don't have to be white, you don't have to like several different cultures that Zora's work touched, right? She touched the lives of so many different people, and it's amazing to see. It really is.
So I am biased. When you said it's like palpable, you can still feel Zora's presence in Fort Pierce. There is one place that I feel Zora's energy the most. And I feel like you can hear her talk. You can envision her working in her garden. You can envision her smoking her cigarette, me arguing with her in my head. Ma'am, this is part of the health issues. But her
Mm-hmm.
house. It was originally 1734 school court, and that house still stands. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of the house?
There's so much history to talk about that house. So this was built by a Dr. Clem Benton, who was not only a medical family doctor, but was also a property developer. There's a whole section of this area called Lincoln Park, which was a segregated Black area that he developed. So he had some updated in the 50s, which was some updated, um, small little homes that he built on that property. And it was affectionately known as Benton Quarters by a lot of people. Still today, there are people who, if you walk around Fort Pierce, they have these Benton Quarters t-shirts. From many, many years ago. There was a lot of pride in that space. But Zora Neale Hurston was the only person to live in this particular house because they knew each other's family from the Eatonville, Sanford area, and he knew that she was a struggling and wonderful artist, and so allowed her to stay there for free. And no one has, to my knowledge, besides some people who have tried to break in, have lived there since. It's been moved. They moved it like 500 feet due north, I believe, because of the expansion of that area and the nearby school, Lincoln Park Academy, where Zora did teach as a substitute. It's on the National Historic Registry, and this is a national treasure. Fort Pierce, Florida Education Foundation, now by way of the Conservation Fund, owns this property. Not only just maintain it, but develop it into a space where people can come and experience what you've experienced there, right? The spirit of Zora. It's not just the place, it's the people that are still there who knew her, who have stories themselves that they've heard about her. There's so much in that area that uh, connects you to Zora in that time.
It's so mind blowing, just what you said. There are still people there that knew Zora when she was alive. Yeah, someone who was her student when she was teaching English, 1958.
Mhm.
And I could tell you about Zora herself, being able to go to her house and go inside, which is something I'm so excited for the public to be able to access. Visioning her sitting with her typewriter on these fruit crates because she often didn't have furniture. Zora was not a wealthy woman at any time in her life. And so she's still working at this typewriter at the little kitchen table by the back door. And it's this very spiritual experience. It really is. It was funny when I went in for the first time, the back door was open. And so
Mm.
Dr. Bitten's family was there to let me in, but they were standing by the door and the front door just crept open slowly, slowly.
Oh,
Like, Lord, it's
wow.
like she was saying,
They
come on
welcome
in.
you in.
Come on in, honey. That's what I hear her saying in my head. So thank you, to the Zora Neale Hurston Florida Education Foundation because the work, known and unknown that you guys have done to ensure that these landmarks still exist, that her legacy is still alive, even having the festival and revitalizing that, it's so important. But Fort Pierce is special to me because I do love Zora, but because I think it was the closest she got to having home again, true
Mm,
home. And
mm,
home
mm.
reflected in the Harlem Renaissance, right, where she was around other creatives, A. Beanie Backus, who was a mentor to the Highwaymen, right? And then she has some scholastic experiences because she's teaching English at Lincoln Park Academy, but she also has community like she had in Eatonville. We have nearby family coming to make sure she's eating and taking care of herself and family dinners, and she's going across the tracks to the Elks Lodge to listen to jazz. And I think that was the most beautiful way to welcome her into her transition, where she felt a part of a community again.
I think that's so wonderful to for you to highlight. And I mean, that means so much to us. And I mean, of course, we lived there for over 20 years in that area, and it speaks so much about what communities were before desegregation. Of course, we know kind of desegregation was inevitable, but it highlights what I think is lost for Blacks in America today, right? That sense of home and belonging is even for me, I feel like is a little lost, right? You that is disjointed. It's not as cohesive as it was for Zora in that space where she could walk to people who were treating her like auntie or cousin, and they had common communication, common language, common, everything, and they could relate to each other. And then on the other side of the tracks, she had, even though that they were not black, they were people who she could connect with, who were artists and who she could develop her skills with as well. So that's what we're trying to create in the place where she where she died too, the nursing home, this idea of what life was like for Blacks in a place like Fort Pierce before desegregation. I know, I just thought it was water fountains in schools. I didn't know it was every single aspect of their lives, even in death. The cemeteries were segregated. There's nothing like actually walking those streets where these people walk and what they had to endure and experience there. And then to still create and be talking about them 50, 60 years later, and people writing books about them and making movies about them, and then being so highlighted in our culture and relevant to our culture today.
The nuance of it is like,
Freedom.
yeah, Zora, you did all of these things while also living, through Jim Crow. And even my son, who's 7, I think this, I wish they would have told us so I would have been prepared. But they showed them like this MLK documentary. And so he came home and he asked, he was like, did Zora live when the Negroes and the whites? And Marvin, I'm telling you, I was like, listen, don't say Negroes to anybody
Oh my
else
God.
anymore. But they, he was only in first grade, so they didn't explain, the transition from the naming conventions. And so, but he was asking, he's like, so Zora couldn't be where white people were. And I'm trying to explain it to him, realizing even it's blowing my mind, the nuance, because technically Zora wasn't supposed to be in a lot of the places that white people were, but they would say like, oh, this is Zora and certain accommodations will have to be made for her. She's not like the rest of the Negroes. And so thinking about how she lived also allows us better context, I think, beyond how history is normally taught, because it's personal narrative. Zora left us so much. Even when she's writing about Eatonville, for example, it's like, oh, this is wonderful. It's this quaint, idyllic town. However, there's still drama in the town.
Mhm.
There are still hierarchy of class in this all black town. In these communities, Fort Pierce is not Eatonville because it wasn't settled, as an incorporated town, but it was still a black settlement.
Mhm.
And so those layers she shows us of community and living. There was this story one of her friends told, which I love. They had gone to a drive-in. And I'm always looking for different angles of Zora's personality. And Zora had to go to the bathroom. And this was in the 50s. And so she was not supposed to utilize the white bathroom. Zora went into that white bathroom, and her friend says Zora didn't, she didn't integrate the bathroom, she commandeered it. Fort Pierce has done such a magnificent job of preserving Zora's time there, of making sure you can walk, the Dust Tracks Heritage Trail. Beautiful. The library is always my first stop so that I don't have to commandeer a bathroom. I can use the library's bathroom.
You can use the library bathroom.
But it is the Zora Neale Hurston Library.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people who need to receive accolades for that. I mean, it's really the county, the city, so many people have really come together to help preserve those different aspects of Zora's life in Fort Pierce. There's so many markers, just a lot of grassroots work that has been done in that St. Lucie County area to preserve Zora's identity there and legacy there. So yeah, it's a really rich place. It really talks about intercultural relations as well prior to desegregation. Like, how did someone like Zora Neale Hurston interact with people who were not Black? There's a lot in textbooks about lynching and these other things that are of course happening that we don't want to downgrade. But there are also some wonderful stories that Zora has of her interacting with other people who sometimes support different civil rights efforts and things of that nature. And I don't know if you want to talk about the Sexton information, but
Of
I have it
course.
in my hands, so I have
Of
to just.
course.
I can't believe that I have this in my hands, like the copies of the actual letters that she wrote to a local pioneer of the Vero Beach area. For those of you who don't know, the neighboring predominantly white city next to Fort Pierce. But there was a cow boy there who created his own cow, and he wanted Zora to promote this cow for him, this new engineered cow. And Zora was had done some writing like this before, and so he wanted her to promote this. And the letters that they have are so endearing and are so amazing to see this, accomplished Black woman and this, you know, unassumingly, right, that there would be a friendship and relationship between this who became very wealthy white man, whose family still has tons of land and wealth in that Vero Beach area, which is among one of the top five, I'm told, most wealthy zip codes in America. So Zora Neale Hurston is rubbing noses with these individuals like it's nothing, and receiving support from them as well through that process. So it's a wonderful, wonderful story.
This is Zora at her finest. Like, ma'am, we're still finding stuff. And I pray, people say, oh, yeah, her manuscripts, they're lost, or they're gone or we'll never find them. And I'm like, they're on their way back to us. It's just interesting because Waldo's son, Sean Sexton, his wife was cleaning out Waldo Sexton's office or something and came across these letters. And she's like, wait. And I'm hoping that will continue to happen as we bring Zora's legacy to different folks, different generations in different geographic areas. They may come upon a letter or something that Zora sent and say, like, oh, we need to highlight this, which I believe Waldo Sexton, to our knowledge, is Zora's last patron. And he's developing Vero. And here Zora is in Fort Pierce, still having health issues and everything, but they're in this conversation. And he said, hey, Zora, I think you should write about my guinea cows. What? Like, how does that happen?
It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. I mean, it just goes to show her breadth and depth, right? As not only a scholar, not only as a writer, as a researcher as well, right? I think if she hadn't had that connection, then of course there would be less ability for her to be aware of that. But I mean, there were also, this wonderful article about Lawrence Silas, the first Black millionaire cowboy in Central Florida, which there's a highway named after him now too there. But I mean, she wrote about him. It seems to me that in that time, people interacted with each other because of their gifts. Like Zora had a gift that was undeniable. You couldn't deny the gift that she had. And so therefore, if he really wanted to sell this cow, he knew that one of the best ways for it to happen is for him to have this conversation with this Black woman, because she can help him get this job done and get it done effectively. And I think it just shows a wonderful interdependence that we have, where I feel as though that is lost in American society too. We have a lot to offer, not only our Black communities, but America at large. And I think that's what Zora shows so vehemently.
The quote that Zora said that told me, like, yeah, maybe there is room for you to do this, and really frames up, her in her 60s doing this work around this guinea cow and having these conversations. Said, like, yeah, this is important. Said research is formalized curiosity. It's poking and prying with purpose.
With purpose. Yeah.
Yeah, so in that way, we can all be researchers.
I love that quote she's that from her where she says, I'm too busy sharpening my oyster knife. You know what I mean? I'm too busy doing the work that I know I've been called to do, that I don't have time to really be concerned about whatever issues, hang-ups, or concerns you may have. It cannot stop me from doing the work that I've been called to do. It's so encouraging, even in this time, because if she could do what she did during that time, what do we have to be worried about? These are first world problems we have.
Very privileged problems that we have indeed. Why do you think Zora's legacy persists?
Well, I think we touched on it here, that she's so prolific and committed so much time and sacrificed so much for her gift, right? I mean, we know that she she got married 3 times, but I don't think either one of those marriages lasted more than a year. And then, no children, separated from like her family in many ways. I'm sure she saw that as a sacrifice. That is a sacrifice that she made to commit to her work. And, me going to the places where she visited, I mean, these extremely remote places in Haiti, even today, it takes you hours to get there by not just plane, but boat. you know, some of these places are just now getting real roads. To know the lengths and the sacrifice that she went through in order to capture this work and to do this work and to preserve it, even in her time, that alone makes it worthy, more than worthy, of us spending the rest of our lives trying to make sure that other people, hold on to it as well. Many people have done much less and sacrificed much less, and that work is glorified. So, why would we not pay homage to this wonderful work that Zora has done, which is second to none?
What's something you wish people knew about Zora Neale Hurston?
And I guess I could just say that of her greatness, her sacrifice, her commitment to her people, one, and to humankind, right? Because even if you see the work that she tried to do in Honduras, which has been found, right? She's a committed anthropologist. She starts out by focusing on African American people and African descendant people and African diasporic people, but also sees that these same connections that she's making with African American people, this is a human condition. And if we would see that, it's not only just about us, and that it's about preserving that human condition and the lives and work of other people. If we don't see that, we've lost so much already. We see that with the work she does in Eatonville by showing, wow, look, all this anthropology is right where I grew up. But then she goes all the way to, other places around the world, Jamaica, Haiti, Honduras, and recognizes that this is a human experience that needs to be preserved and is worthy of preservation. We are just living sometimes, especially in America, where we're making money, we're doing this, we're doing that. We're forgetting about the wonderful stories that our family has. And that's what Zora does for me. I see my grandma in her work, right? When I read Their Eyes Are Watching God, and when I read Jonas Gorvine, I see my parents' love story, right? I see my grandparents' love story. And so for Zora to capture that, that is the human condition, and it needs to be preserved. I think that's what I would love people to know about Zora, that she did that in a way that very few can say they have. And it's still relevant today.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you for
Thank you
your
for having
work.
me. I know I'm long-winded like Zora.
So truly, Marvin and I could talk all day. When you
All
get to
day.
sit with people who love Zora in the way that you do, you never run out of stuff to talk about. Thank you for all of your work preserving Zora and truly answering her call.
Thank you so much.